Sometimes I call it a cycle, a vicious cycle. But it's sort of like, the more, or I call it the more. That's from Terry Real. The more my partner, criticizes me or nags me about something, the more I distance myself and shut down and don't want to talk about it. And the more I don't want to talk about it, the more my partner criticizes and nags me and tries to keep talking about it. So it creates this vicious cycle, or a pattern that we get into that, reinforces itself, which is part of what I help couples try to be aware of. And I try to help, once couples can see the way they bring themselves into the pattern, I think that they can begin to be aware of it and sort of work together.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask the Therapist. Today I'm joined by Shane. Shane is a speaker, educator, a marriage and a family therapist. He's also a podcast host himself. And Shane is joining me from New Hampshire. And hello, Shane. How are you?
Hey, James. Good to be here.
Good to have you with me. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. I am a couples therapist. I have a practice here about an hour from Boston. And I also have the podcast where I talk about the practice of couples therapy. So I do a lot of teaching of other couples therapists. And I really enjoy working with couples and working with relationships.
It could be, I don't know if challenging is the right word when you have two different minds coming into your office.
Yeah, definitely. I think people have different perspectives. And so sometimes it's hard to hold both people's perspectives at the same time when they see things so differently. But I think that's why they often come into therapy, because they can't break through some of those challenges.
Definitely, yeah. I think a lot of couples therapy, I think something that a lot of couples should be doing before they get to the stage of having to go to therapy.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. I think these are oftentimes the communication and just the relationship strategies, I think, are things that we don't learn. We don't necessarily grow up learning these things. And it is something that needs to be learned, and it is something that can be challenging. So it's really helpful when, even if couples just get a book or some kind of guide or go to some kind of workshop or something to learn how to be in relationship with each other.
Yeah, if we looked at it like we look at jobs like it'd be my help. This job, you're always trying to learn more to kind of grow. But in a relationship, we get comfortable. And yeah,
definitely. And when you think about it, it's something that is so important to people's well-being, how they feel like they're doing in their relationship. And people spend tons of time and energy and money and like preparing for like the logistics of a wedding, maybe, or all kinds of other things. So it's worthwhile to put that kind of energy into your relationship as well.
Definitely. Today we're going to be talking about couples communication skills, which is something that a lot of adults struggle with. And before we get to that, we're just going to play a quick game called 1 for 1.
Okay.
And the way that works is I'll give you a word and you say the first word that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one is radiant.
Light.
And second one is managers.
Manages.
Yeah.
Facilitates.
The third one is feedback.
Response.
The fourth one is rainbow.
Color.
And the last one is bread.
Flower.
Brilliant. That's it. I just like to start with that.
That's fun. That's good.
Just to kind of throw your mind off what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna grab. Sorry. If I'm looking on this side, I just have my water here and my honey and lemon tea. So yes, let's get going. So the first question I have for you is, why do couples need to focus on communication?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. And I think everybody does need to focus on communication. But when you think about communication, I think it's really how we're bringing ourselves into the world. It's really how we're bringing the message of what we're saying into the world. And so I think that I'm focusing on communication, but what I'm really focusing on is respect and valuing other people and myself. And I think it's so much more important than that. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. If my wife comes home late and I say, I can't believe you're late, it seems like I'm communicating something pretty simple. I'm just sort of passively saying, I can't believe you're late or something. But there's a very shaming quality to the way that I might be saying that. Or at least it could be taken that way, that I'm trying to make a judgment or criticism on my partner for the fact that they're late. And I'm not dealing with it directly, but I'm sort of, it just gets put out there as sort of a passive aggressive shaming comment. And so I'm always teaching people, it's much more helpful to learn how to communicate in a way that owns your reality and is not coming from a place that's blaming or critical. So in that situation, a better option might be for me to say, hey, being on time is really important to me, and I'm feeling a little frustrated that you said you would be home at this time and you're running late and you didn't call me. And so, I'm sharing with my partner how I'm feeling, I'm sharing my reality, but I'm not coming from a place that's blaming or judgmental.
So this is important to choose your words carefully. So,
yes,
are you saying if you're going to communicate how it makes you feel rather than what you think?
I think that oftentimes sharing how I feel is going to be helpful to the situation. But I think it's case by case, where my goal has to be to figure out what kind of communication works for my partner. And I have to know myself really well and share with my partner what kind of communication works best for me. But usually when I say something about my feelings, I'm sharing my feelings, it takes the blame away from my partner, and I'm owning my reality of this is what's coming up for me.
because often when it comes to communication, especially when we're talking about couples, how you process information is different to the way I process it. So is that more a case of knowing what works for you, so you can figure out what works for them, but more importantly, knowing what works for you?
That's right. It's really useless oftentimes if we're getting into a debate with our partner about what's true or what's the right way of doing something. I often say it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. So if let's say with the coming home late thing, if my partner comes in and I say, I can't believe you're late again. And they say, well, I'm not really that late. And I'll say, yeah, well, you said you'd be home at this time. No. I said I'd be home at this. And we just go back and forth. Like we're trying to figure out who's right in the situation. The reality is that I'm having feelings that I don't like, that feel uncomfortable. I was probably underneath all of that, I was just worried about her, and because I care about her. But like, it often comes off as blaming toward that person. And then if I start blaming her, she's more likely to become defensive and protective of her reality. She's not listening to my struggle and my feelings at that point. She's just moving into protection of herself, and it becomes a sort of right or wrong conversation. So, even in the way that we communicate, it's often helpful. Sometimes I tell people one of the most important skills for couples to learn is how to give each other feedback. That I can tell my partner, hey, when you were speaking in a really loud voice, that didn't work very well for me. I have a hard time with that. So it would work a lot better if when you had something important to say, you kind of lowered your voice and you said it a little slower, and I would be able to stay with you better. So I'm just sort of like giving my partner feedback about what would work better for me. I'm not telling them that speaking in a loud voice is inherently wrong. I'm just saying it doesn't work very well for me. And we want to get that feeling in a relationship where I really want to help you, help me, and I want you to help you, you to help me help you. So that it feels like a situation of generosity between each other.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. My next question is, and what is assertive communication? There is such thing as a healthy assertive, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think of that, some people think, oh, well, I just have to be a doormat and I have to keep my mouth shut and I'm not allowed to have an opinion, right? And that's not the case at all. That I want people to be assertive. I want people to express their boundaries. I want people to be able to share what doesn't work for them. But we have to be able to do that with love and respect. You can be firm and respectful at the same time. But that's very different than passively just taking whatever's going on in the situation. If you're feeling like, and I think about people who just start dating, a lot of the times, people have a hard time saying what their boundary is because they're afraid to rock the boat and they don't want the relationship to end, and they end up giving in to more things than they really want to because they just want to stay with the person and make the other person happy. And I think it's so important to have that kind of assertive communication so that you are expressing what you need and what you want with love and compassion, but not holding back on what's true for you and what's authentic for you. And that way the other person can really get to know who you authentically are from the beginning and will understand what your boundaries are. And it's going to be a much more authentic relationship. And there's potential there. Well, the fear is, and it could very well happen, that you will find out that you aren't a good match for each other and you'll move on. That could happen if you truly, share yourself in a way that's, true, that could happen. But the good news is if you do that and you still decide to stay together, then both of you are on the same page about what you're working with, and you understand each other's boundaries.
Just in relation to dating at the start of the relationship, obviously at that stage you kind of allow more to happen that you probably wouldn't have. I don't know. Like when you're talking about assertiveness, like, yeah, you might be afraid, like, oh, if I kind of assert something now, it will come across as pushy, so I won't do that now. And 2 or 3 years later, you're gonna go back to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that then what?
And I think there are people who are too pushy and too, I don't know if you'd say too assertive, but too selfish or something, where they want things a certain way, and they're always saying like, well, we should go eat this for dinner, or we should go do this tonight, or we should go do, and they're sort of dictating the way that things happen, and the other person sort of loses their voice. And so just to be mindful of that dynamic where, both people need to learn how to listen to each other, and both people need to learn how to have their voice in a way that is assertive but respectful, and leave space for the other person's voice as well.
Yeah, it could be difficult when if you didn't do it for 3 years and all of a sudden you want to start doing it. Then
yeah, absolutely.
Then it's like, oh, where is this coming from?
Yeah, that's a great point. That happens to people a lot.
And you can't just say, I've always been like that, because you weren't.
Right.
Yeah. Great. My next question is, what are the roadblocks for good communication?
Well, I think, if I'm being blaming and critical of my partner, if I'm saying like, I can't believe you're late again, it doesn't require a lot of vulnerability on my part. I can just sit on my high horse and act entitled and say, well, you're the one who's the problem because you're always late. But if I actually want to be emotionally intimate in my relationship, if I want to open up, if I want more connection with my partner, it's scary. It's going to require a lot of vulnerability for me to begin to speak from the first person and say, this is hard for me, or this is important to me, or this is what I want. It's really hard for people. And so people sometimes aren't even conscious of that. But the roadblocks, I think, are often our own issues with shame, or our own issues with having a hard time valuing ourselves, or feeling like I'm enough, or feeling like I matter. So if I'm struggling with that on a personal level, which all of us do, one way or another, then that's going to seep into my relationship and get in the way of my communication. So the more I work on valuing myself, moving into my own self-esteem, the better that I will become at having confidence in my communication and being able to listen better, having more compassion, and hopefully not getting stuck quite as much.
Yeah. So with that, when we're talking about roadblocks, it's more of finding out what's stopping you from expressing yourself rather than what your partner's doing.
Right. Like there's a sense of stuckness in the communication oftentimes when you have to make a decision about something. So if we're trying to make a big decision, like, should we have a baby or not? Like, that's a really, really big decision, and there's a lot at stake, and it's going to change what your life looks like for the next 40 years. And so, people oftentimes get stuck in something that feels like an argument, where they're going back and forth about what's the right decision. And I think it's really helpful to get unstuck. Sometimes you have to take the solution off the table and say, well, we eventually have to get to that. But for now, let's just take turns. Let me listen to your perspective and what you want and where you're coming from. And then, I'll get a chance to share my perspective and where I'm coming from and feel heard. And really just take your time to listen to each other and understand where each person's coming from before we get to that problem solving stuff.
Sounds difficult.
Yeah, for sure. But if I'm a listener and I know my job is just to tune into my partner's reality, it doesn't matter how crazy it sounds to me. All I have to do is stay with them and with compassion and understanding and curiosity, try to understand why this is important to them or what's coming up for them. Then there's no way that I'm going to get stuck or that it's going to be an argument. All I have to do is be curious about my partner's reality for that moment. And it's incredible because we all want that. We all seek that. We want to feel understood. Yeah. We want to feel validated, and so it often really sort of calms people's nervous systems when they have the ability to give that to each other and helps them get out of that feeling of stuckness.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And yes, my next question is, what are some of the signs, what are some of the signs that your partner has poor communication skills?
Well, I think
this is definitely one for argument.
Yeah, so when people come into my office for couples therapy, they're very good at telling me all the things that are wrong with their partner.
Yes.
both people believe that 90% of the problem is their partner, which obviously can't be true. And so the way you're asking the question to me is going to lead people into the mindset of, now I'm looking for the ways in which my partner is doing the wrong thing. When what I want to teach people is to move into staying on your side of the street, just taking responsibility for yourself, your own personal empowerment. So I might shift the question to, how do I know when I'm communicating in a way that's unhealthy? Because and again, it goes back to what I was talking about before, which is like, if I'm focusing on my partner and blaming and trying to be right and criticizing the way they're doing it, then it's going to feel less empowering for me. Whereas if I'm seeing the world from the framework of, me being in a relationship with this person is an empowered choice that I make every day when I wake up. I don't have to be in this relationship. My boundaries are not about changing this other person. My boundaries are about deciding, can I move into acceptance for this flawed person who I'm with, who's going to make mistakes? Can I move into acceptance for that? Or, is it too much? Or is there enough good stuff going on in this relationship that I can sort of grieve some of the things that I'm not getting? So that I can have that empowered mindset of, yes, I can be accepting of my partner, and I can work for change on the things that I really want, and I can have a voice with respect and compassion. But I'm not sitting there feeling like a victim, thinking that I need my partner to do things differently in order for me to feel okay, because that's going to feel a lot more helpless.
I'm guessing, obviously, when you get couples in, when they're at that stage where there's a lot of he does this, she does this, and this blindness, no one can sit around. I'm guessing by the time you reach that stage, obviously there's no communication. At that stage, you just blame and defend.
Yeah, and it's interesting because things can, I don't know if you have this term, in the United States, we say things can really snowball, meaning like it's like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
snowball rolling down the hill, where like once it gets
Mm.
going, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So like when things start going negatively, they can really snowball in a negative direction, where people are no longer giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Even their
Mm.
partner, who apparently they love and they care about more than anyone else in the world, all of a sudden they're seeing as the enemy. They don't have any, positive regard for each other anymore. So it can take a really negative turn. The good thing that I've seen is that, I had a couple who I met with today. They were experiencing that for like a year, where things
Mm.
were really, really negative. I met with them 2 weeks ago, and they already have it turned around in a positive direction, where now things are snowballing in a positive way, because they're starting to give each other the benefit of the doubt. They're starting to assume good intentions from the other person, and it's really helping, to really transform the way they're communicating and the way they're seeing each other and feeling respected in that relationship. But you're right, like people can really get stuck in this place where it feels like, I don't know how we're going to break through this sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you get into that habit where you're just looking at the bad, it's very difficult to step out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
Like you
sure.
just forget all the good things that they do. All you see is just you remember
That's
all the
right.
problems.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. And yes, great. Sorry. Great. My next question is, yes, how can couples successfully resolve a conflict?
Yeah. So I really like to teach people about that idea that I was describing, where there's one speaker and one listener, and we're setting aside solving the problem. So each
Mm.
person's going to take a turn, being the speaker, and and the other person being the listener. And it's actually much harder to be the listener, because the listener has to make it. The listener is at the service of the speaker. So they're just trying to be curious, trying to move into understanding or validation of the speaker's experience. And the speaker's responsibility is to speak from the first person, to say, this is what I experienced. This is the story I tell myself about what happened. This is how I
Mm.
feel. This is what would work better for me. Things like that, to really own that reality. And then you have to take turns, right? Because oftentimes two people are trying to speak and no one's really listening, and no one's really
Mm.
feeling heard at that point. So, in order to make that work, I think you have to look at those as two very different roles. And we both have to take turns in order to feel like we can feel understood about our perspective.
Mm. Mm. And with conflict, obviously, sometimes we think it's resolved, but it's not really resolved. You just kind of accepted
Yeah, that's a
the
good point.
situation, probably.
Yeah, because is my goal really to solve the problem?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I do, it's good when we can come to some sort of conclusion and solve the problem. Sure, that does feel good. But
Mm.
sometimes people are so focused on solving the problem that they lose sight of having respect for each other in the conversation. So I would say the number one goal, or the number one priority, should be, am I holding my partner in warm regard? Am I able to stay in respect? Am I able to stay in compassion and understanding as I'm having this conversation? If we can come to a solution or a conclusion about this, then great. But
Mm.
I can't be at the expense of doing something harsh or hurtful to my partner. I mean, we all make mistakes sometimes,
Yeah.
but the goal should be to maintain that level of respect and warmth as much as possible.
I suppose if you're not approaching the situation from that angle, you're still in defensive mode. You're not really trying to solve the conflict. You're just trying to.
Yeah, I think that's
you're
right.
Still like defending. You're still defending whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I mean, I'm sure it's true for all of us that when I'm in the heat of that moment where it feels like an argument, I'm like the least capable of actually like using my rational brain. Like that's not the time where I'm going to come up with the best solutions for things, you know?
No. You sometimes see it with, say, a couple have, say, an argument, for example, and one walks off and the other follows them. It just doesn't resolve the situation.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. It's just like we're still in that kind of heated mode. So whatever's going on.
Yeah, a lot of times the best thing couples can do is just take some space apart and cool off, regulate their nervous systems before they come back to try to talk about it again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
My next question is there a pattern for disconnection? Because often with disconnection, is there a pattern for disconnection? Because you only notice disconnection once it's happened. Then you're like, oh, when did this happen?
Yeah. Oh, a pattern for disconnect. Yeah. So I think that each couple's pattern is unique to the couple. And I definitely think that most couples have some sort of pattern that they fall into that will lead to a sense of disconnection, you know, or a cycle. Sometimes I call it a cycle, a vicious cycle. But it's sort of like, you know, the more, or I call it the more. That's from Terry Real. The more my partner, you know, criticizes me or nags me about something, the more I distance myself and shut down and don't want to talk about it. And the more I don't want to talk about it, the more my partner criticizes and nags me and tries to keep talking about it. So it creates this vicious cycle, you know, or a pattern that we get into that, you know, reinforces itself, you know, which is part of what I help couples try to be aware of. And I try to help, you know, once couples can see the way they bring themselves into the pattern, I think that they can begin to be aware of it and sort of work together. Look, you know, they can look at the pattern as an external thing where the couple's on the same team trying to work against the pattern and notice how they're bringing themselves into the situation and make a plan about how they're going to do things in a different way.
Yeah, with patterns, it does take some self-awareness because you don't even know you're doing it most of the time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you don't even know it. And especially if there's for example, like an argument, for example, where people get more defensive, you go back to your pattern straight away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you're right. Like, we don't even know. I might have grown up in a family where, you know, let's say no one ever talked about emotions. And then my partner starts to try to talk to me about emotions. And I start getting flooded and overwhelmed and shutting down because I don't know how to have a conversation about emotions. Now, I might not make that connection unless I go to therapy that, of course, I don't know how to talk about emotion. Of course, I shut down when someone starts talking about emotions because I never learned how to do that growing up in my family, or I never had that modeled for me or something like that. And so just having that compassion for myself can be a really good starting point, you know, that anybody who may have grown up in a family like that would be struggling in this way.
I saw a thing before where it was a couple where she was trying to talk to him about how she feels, and he was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. Because she's
Yeah.
trying to talk about her emotions, and he's just like, I don't know what to do with this information.
Yeah. And that brings up another interesting topic, which is about the way that males and females are socialized differently from a very young age in ways that we don't even realize, so that often plays into relationships similar to what, the example you're talking about.
Mm, yeah, it's always a struggle. Great. My next question is, what do couples argue about? Below the argument.
Yeah, so oftentimes people think that they're arguing about, money or parenting or sex or, whatever the topics are about that, being on time or the dishes in the sink or whatever the topics that people argue about. But, I think that underneath the surface, there is a lot more at stake, or there's a lot more coming into it. Back to some of the ideas I was mentioning about, like, if my partner, if I come home and my partner says, did you forget to take out the trash this morning? It could easily lead to an argument about the trash, whether I took the trash out or not or whatever. But like underneath that, I, have a huge amount of shame, possibly. If I'm starting to argue and be defensive, it might be coming from a place of shame for me, that I'm feeling like I'm not enough as a husband. I'm feeling like I'm not enough as a dad. I'm feeling like maybe, I'm failing because I always forget to take the trash out. What's wrong with me? And again, people may or may not be fully aware of that, but I think all of us have some of that, so once it starts touching on that, I either have to go into a shame spiral of like, this feels horrible, I'm a terrible person, blah, 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 I'll never be good enough. Or what most of us do instead is we don't like that feeling, so we bounce up into, well, no, I'm not the problem, you're the problem because you're just nagging me and blah, 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 blah. Because I don't want to go to that place of vulnerability and look at my insecurity in that way. And so we think that we're arguing about the trash, but oftentimes, we're really sort of going into a place of self-protection, and both people are trying to argue our own value or argue our own, identity. Like I'm enough, I'm good enough, but it's doing the opposite, because then I'm just being disrespectful or coming across in a harsh way or a mean way, and it's getting away from the thing that I really want to get across.
Even serious, say, for even money argument, for example, like that could be like one, say, in a relationship, one person, what couples argue the most about expenditure.
Yeah.
So they might be arguing about who's spending the most money. Is that maybe, like, I might think that we're arguing about the money, but deep down, I feel like you're challenging my worth or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like, if my partner is asking me, like, how are we going to pay the bills, or she's spending a lot of money or something, if underneath I have a value that I really want to save up and have more freedom in my life, I really want to, someday be able to retire and not have to work so much anymore. If that's a value that's important to me, I might not be conscious of those bigger picture kind of things. I might just be pissed off that, my partner's spending a lot of money, and or my, they're asking me how we're going to pay the bills, and I'm getting flooded and overwhelmed. And it could also be, have an identity as a provider, and I feel like insecure if we're having a financial conversation because I'm afraid that I'm not doing well enough, or I'm not providing well enough, or whatever. All kinds of things it could be, it depends on the individual person.
Yeah. But to have those conversations around what's below the argument, that's the hard conversations.
Right. So,
Yeah.
right. And that's where it requires the vulnerability. What would it be like if I could really open up to my wife in a vulnerable way and say, when you ask me how we're going to pay the bills, I start feeling those emotions coming up for me. I start noticing like I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm not even sure why. I start feeling like angry. And, I've noticed that my identity as a provider is really important to me, and I start to feel insecure, and this is what's going on for me. Now all of a sudden my partner has a really good understanding of like who I am and what's going on for me. And I'm not blaming them for asking about the bills. I'm just, sharing with them what happens for me. And then we can come up with a plan together. How can we set it up in a way that's different, perhaps, so that we can have these conversations about the bills or whatever we need to talk about in a way that's going to work better for both of us, in a way that, and maybe part of it is like strengthening our foundation, right? Like,
Yes.
What if she started off by saying, I'm so grateful for how hard you're working and how you provide for our family, and I'm really wondering how we're going to pay the cell phone bill this month. But like, so to make me feel like there's a message coming across that's like there's that gratitude, but also there's like maybe the question as well.
Yeah. No, yes, it does require a lot of vulnerability to have those hard conversations. Totally. Yeah. And yeah, thank you, Shane. My next question is learning to listen. How important is that? Because I think a lot of us switch off.
Yeah, and I definitely think, when I was saying before that we're socialized differently as males and females. Now, obviously everyone's unique, everyone's different. It doesn't apply to everybody, these things. But in general, men tend to have a much harder time with listening. I think we're socialized to believe that we're supposed to have the answer. I think we're socialized to believe that, we're supposed to fix things. We're supposed to solve the problem. So if your partner starts talking to you about their day and all they want is for you to listen, but you start going into trying to fix it or give them explanations or tell them how they should do things differently, and all of a sudden they're getting mad at you, it's probably because they're feeling like they're not asking you to fix the problem. They're not asking you to come up with solutions. They just want to feel heard and understood. They just want to talk about their day and feel like you're there with them. You're their partner. You're sharing, in what they did that day. And so, that can be just that in itself can be something that's really helpful for couples, is sort of like setting it up from the beginning and saying like, hey, what kind of listener do you want? Do you just want to vent and I won't say much of anything? Or do you want like a problem solving type of conversation? And like asking your partner ahead of time, like, what type of listener do you want right now? And even that requires the ability to listen, right? Like, you have to be able to like take in the other person's perspective. But a lot of times, people end up feeling sort of suffocated if they're not feeling heard. If every time they start to talk about something they're struggling with and their partner's just trying to fix it or just trying to jump in with defensiveness, then they're never feeling like there's any space for what's going on for them. They're never feeling like they can share the things they're struggling with or how they're feeling, because their partner's always sort of shutting down the conversation whenever it comes up. So it's good for people to be aware of. And I tell people it's it's one way of taking the pressure off, right? You don't have to have an answer. Like, you're not a mind reader. You don't have to have everything figured out for your partner. All you have to do is sit back and ask them what they want. All you have to do is sit back and be curious, try to be understanding of what it's like for them. And that way there's no pressure on you to remember, how am I supposed to be in this conversation? No, just make it about your partner.
Yeah. Like, the example you used there, often when she's talking, but just say she's talking, you're already thinking of the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're already like,
Definitely.
like, you already have a couple of ideas in your head how we can fix this. It's like, no, she's not looking for you to fix it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think men struggle with that a lot because part of who we think we are is we're meant to fix things and have solutions to all the problems. So if she's bringing me something that I can't fix, it's challenging me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you forget that, like, you don't have to fix everything. Because
Yeah.
Great. And my next question is, are there listening skills?
Yeah.
Is there such a thing?
So I think it's just about moving into that humility, that I was just describing, where or I can list off of a couple things that are really helpful with the listening skills. One is mirroring. So whatever my partner says, I'm just mirroring back.
Yes.
If they say, like, hey, I had a really hard day at work, I could say, oh my gosh, I'm listening to you, and I hear you that you had a really hard day at work. The second one is, acceptance of their reality. I think if I'm a good listener, even if my partner says, I'm really scared that there's aliens in the basement or something like that, and I'm thinking, like, my initial response might be like, are you crazy? Like, don't worry, there's no aliens in the basement. It's fine. But, like, instead of jumping, I would say that's a form of fixing the problem. Like, I'm just telling her not to worry about it because it's not real. But instead of doing that, I would say start with a little bit of acceptance for whatever the person's saying. So she says, I'm really scared there's aliens in the basement. I could say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you're feeling nervous about that. But I'm giving her some acceptance. Or I could move into curiosity. I could say, tell me more about why you're scared of that. Tell me more about, why you're thinking that. And then the last one I'll say is validation, which is that, it makes sense that you feel that way. If she were to say, I'm so angry because I was talking to my friend and she didn't understand what I was saying, again, the bad way of responding, of not listening, might be to say, oh, well, did you try this? Well, did you say it like this? Oh, did you try, but instead, if I want to do a healthier way of listening, I could validate her and say, oh my gosh, that must have felt really bad that you didn't feel understood by your friend. So I'm just validating what she said, making her feel like it makes sense that she would feel that way.
Yeah, because when it comes to listening, I think a lot of us kind of listen to respond.
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Like, if she's telling me something, I'm already figuring out what to say next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to emphasize, if I'm mirroring and being curious and accepting and validating, then I'm making it about her. The energy of it, the conversation is still about her. I'm not sitting there thinking about my response, which oftentimes is me just making it about me.
Yeah, 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 totally. Yeah, yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for that. Sorry, two more questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
How can we improve communication in our relationship?
Well, I think one of the things I talk about um, is that there's never a need for harshness or being disrespectful. Like when you think about um, physical violence, for example, I use this example a lot. Like most of us have a line that we would never cross. That we would never physically harm another person. Well, particularly our family or our partner, that we would never cross that line. And I like to say that we should also start thinking about that with respect to emotional abuse, psychological abuse, like the way that
Yeah.
we, if we're name calling, if we're raising our voice and yelling at each other, if we're, being shaming or even blaming or critical of another person, that we're bringing emotionally hurtful things into the situation. And I really encourage people to have a line where I am making a decision that I'm going to be in the world in a way that's not hurtful to anyone else, right? So that if and I make mistakes, I might start raising my voice a little bit or becoming blaming toward my partner. Nobody's perfect, but it's about I don't want to live with the idea that that's a healthy way of being in a relationship with someone. That like it is
Yeah.
not justified for me to do that. No matter what's happening in front of me, that's never going to be justified. So if I make a mistake, I can be accountable and apologize and repair. But that I want to start to live my life in a way where I'm responsible for myself. I'm responsible for living nonviolently, both physically, but also emotionally and psychologically. And not just with other people, but with myself as well.
Yeah.
The way we're hard on ourselves, the way we, criticize ourselves or beat ourselves down. I think it's really important that my commitment to nonviolence includes my relationship with myself. And I think if people start having that as a starting point, that a lot of the communication stuff comes a lot easier from there.
Feeds into like if I'm not doing it to myself, I'm not gonna do it to you. And
Yeah.
especially with psychological issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people
Yeah.
treat themselves much worse than they would treat anyone else.
Sad realization.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. 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 Totally. Yeah. And yeah, sorry, thank you. My next question is, this is my last question. What are some of the tips for good communications?
The keys for good communication?
Some tips for good communication.
Oh, tips, yeah.
Yeah.
So to go back to some of the things I was saying before, I think it's really good to define who is the speaker, who's the listener. Use those good listening skills if you're the listener. Use some framework if you're the speaker. You're speaking from the first person. You're saying, this is how I feel. There's something called the feedback wheel. People can Google it, but it's basically 4 steps that the speaker can take, which is this is what I experienced. This is the story I tell myself about it. This is how I feel. And this is my request.
Oh, yeah.
And so, have something like that as your framework if you're the speaker. And then it's really good just to have a gratitude practice, maybe once a day, where you tell your partner something that you're grateful for about them, and just really like working on that foundation of love and respect for each other and understanding and compassion. Because then when you get to the difficult communication stuff, you're more likely to be able to give each other the benefit of the doubt. So those are some of the final thoughts about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And suppose, you have to kind of practice that and build that into the relationship. And so it becomes easier in the long run. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point too. This is a practice, that it's almost like learning a new language that, people, you might feel like you're stumbling through it at first. It might feel like a challenge, but the more you keep practicing, the more you keep practicing, the easier it will get. So it's another way to have compassion for yourself. Like, it's going to be a struggle and that's okay, but it's worthwhile to keep practicing.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And
thank you, James.
I have something I saw you posted online the other day, which I thought was very funny. Mirror neurons.
Yeah.
What is that again?
Well, humans have these mirror neurons, which sort of are part of why we have the ability to feel compassion and understanding for other people. But another, thing that happens is if I see somebody eating something delicious, that my mirror neurons fire, and I almost have the sensation of wanting that to, being hungry and wanting to experience or imagining what it would taste like to be experiencing that with them. But you can see how sometimes it happens where, if you go into work, if somebody goes into work in an office with a bunch of people and everybody's in a good mood and everybody's, feeling positive, then it's you're much more likely to start feeling positive. Your mirror neurons sort of interact with the human beings around you. But and the same can be true if everyone's kind of negative and down. And so it's something that in some ways it's helpful to move into a sense of empowerment that if everybody around me is negative, that doesn't mean that I have to follow suit. I want to be how can I bring some positivity to the situation to help the other people's neurons start firing in a positive way or something like that.
Brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant. Final two questions which are not related to anything we've been talking about. What would your ideal therapist be like if you were to go to therapy, if you are in therapy?
Well, specifically, if I'm in couples therapy, I want somebody who is going to be very directive, who's going to be very assertive, because I know there are couples therapists out there who just sort of sit back and listen, and they're very nice people and they're very compassionate and they listen, but the couple doesn't feel like any progress because they're not actually, the therapist isn't actually engaging with what's going on in the situation. And some people might want that for individual therapy. I understand if some people just want to, somebody to listen. But I really don't think it works well for couples therapy. I don't think I would want. So I want someone who's directive, who's going to tell me the mistakes I'm making in my communication with my partner as I'm there interacting.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And my last question for you is, what do you do for fun?
Well, I have 3 kids and they're really involved in sports. We like to go skiing. We like to go swimming in the summer. We like to play basketball, play baseball, all kinds of different stuff like that. So my fun right now is just getting them to all their activities and where they need to be.
Yeah.
And, also like playing with them, like, playing basketball or skiing or whatever we're doing that weekend. So, and we have a lot of good here in New Hampshire. We have we have mountains, we have the coast pretty close by. So a lot of good places to get outside and go on a hike and do things like that.
Be with nature. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have to calm my body back down. So
No
only
problem.
at the start it comes on.
Yeah, no problem.
If you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a quick review on my Facebook page, Don't Be Afraid to Talk, or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends. You might just reach that person who needs to hear this message. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.